Have you ever wondered how Social Security decides to give you a raise each year and what that increase actually means for your retirement? Welcome to another episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast, where we want to empower and educate women to live your retirement on your terms. I'm your host, Eric Blake, practicing retirement planner with over 25 years of experience, founder of Blake Wealth Management, and I would not be the man I am today without the women in my life. Joining me again on this episode is Wendy McConnell. Wendy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am very good. So just fair warning before we get into this episode. This is one that as I was preparing my notes, I had to really fight the urge to just completely nerd out. So just fair warning. I'm relying on you to keep me on track and not going down any rabbit holes. Is that fair?
I have to stop you from being a nerd.
Yes, it's all on your shoulders.
All right. That is a big responsibility, but I will try and take
I
it
understand.
on.
I'm self-admitted nerd, so I get it. Especially when it comes to Social Security.
All right. Here we
No,
go.
this stuff is fun to me. I know it's not fun to many other people, but I like it.
Hey, we're talking about increases that can be fun.
It can be, but there's obviously, as you probably expect, there's a little controversy that surrounds this too. So we'll get into all that as we go through the content.
Okay.
So just out of curiosity, how well do you feel like you or just people in general understand how Social Security actually increases your benefit over time?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes. Good. That's a good thing. This is a good topic then. Well, I think what's interesting is I think a lot of people, because you really only see this cost of living announcement that occurs, the COLA, that gets announced every year sometime around October. But I don't necessarily know that many people understand the difference between how benefits grow while you're working,
Right.
but also what happens when you do turn 62, or what this actual cost of living adjustment actually means. Because if anybody's working right now and they're in their 40s or 50s, it doesn't mean anything. And I'll explain why that is in just a little bit. But what I basically want to go through in this episode is what this new 2.8% cost of living increase means. That was the actual number that's going to be in effect for 2026. How Social Security actually increases your benefit, why those early years, even when you were in the retail store, whatever you might have been doing in your teenage years, actually does matter, but also how working in your later 50s, your 60s, maybe even your 70s can actually still boost your benefit as well. And most importantly, how do we use all this to make better retirement planning decisions?
All right.
Sound good?
I'm ready.
And don't forget, as always, the links and resources can be found at the simplyretirementpodcast.com. All right, so let's start with the headline number, right? So Social Security benefits are going to increase by 2.8% for 2026.
Okay.
Now, here's basically what happens is similar, typically around the later part of October, Social Security makes this announcement. They announce the cost of living adjustment or the COLA for the following year. As we're recording this, it was actually just a few weeks ago, but by the time people are listening to this in January, you might have even already received your first check with this increased benefit if you're already receiving benefits. But I really do think this is still a great time to understand and plan for what this increase means. So to start off, this increase, it really applies to people who are age 62 and older, whether you have filed your for Social Security benefits or not, right?
Okay.
It also, of course, anybody that is receiving benefits, it definitely applies. And then it's going to apply for things like spousal benefits and survivor benefits and all those types of things as well. But here's, of course, the important thing to remember is this is not a bonus. It just simply means that you're getting this increase to hopefully help your benefit keep up with rising prices, right? So that gives you some idea that this is a result of prices continuing to increase. We know this has been a challenge over the last few years, but this is basically Social Security's methodology of trying to help you keep up with that spending, those cost of living increases. And so to understand how meaningful this is, I do think it also is helpful to talk briefly just about how Social Security measures inflation, because this is where some of that controversy actually does come in and why I think it can be really tough for many seniors, especially if Social Security is the primary income source.
Okay.
So when we talk about what this is, so there's something called CPI, and you hear it on the news all the time, but nobody really explains what this means, I don't think. And so actually CPI basically stands for Consumer Price Index.
I knew that one.
You do that one? Perfect. And so what this basically, it measures everyday food, like food, gas, housing, healthcare, all these different things. But there's another version of CPI, which is more important for Social Security recipients. And this is what is called CPI-W.
Okay. I don't know that
And
one.
this is specifically the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. And yes, I'm reading that because I don't want to try to remember it.
Okay, so W represents all of that.
CPI-W. That's what we just call it CPI-W. But what it does is basically for those, it's actually reflective of people who are still working. So it's going to put more weight on gas and transportation, work related costs, but less weight on things like healthcare, prescription drugs, housing, utilities, things like that, that for many seniors often is much more impactful. And that's why I think it's so important to realize when we're talking about this increase, why it doesn't always feel like a very helpful item, right? Because your personal inflation might actually be significantly higher than that 2.8%. And what's interesting is that they take this number, they take the CPI-W number for the months of July, August, and September. So 3 months. That's it. They take the number during those 3 months, and that's what they use to determine the increase in Social Security for the following year.
Okay, got it.
And so it's basically that 3-month window. Now, there is actually what I would call it best termed as an experimental index called CPI-E, which is not really a technical index. It's out there, but there's conversations you might expect of saying, how do we apply a CPI number reflective of people who are working for people who are retired? How does that make any sense? Right.
Right.
So this new potential CPI-E number is for people that are age 62 and older, where it does give more weighting to healthcare and housing. And actually, many people think it's going to be a better measure for retirees, but here's the problem. If it increases Social Security more than what the CPI-W number would, that also creates an additional strain on the Social Security system. So we already know that's a concern. So if we're increasing the benefit even further because it's more reflective of what seniors are actually dealing with, that might actually increase the problem that we already have in the first place.
Which is it's running out unless we do something.
It's running out unless we do something. And we've talked about some of the possible solutions, and we maybe get into that a little bit later on. But the bottom line is this is why it's important to understand that if this cost of living increase number is based on working households and not retirees, again, you may feel like your personal inflation is rising at a much faster rate. And that's really, and we start getting into some of these planning concepts that we'll talk about.
Okay.
Now, I want to talk about how your benefit actually grows over your lifetime. And again, a lot of people get confused about this. And again, it really comes into play when you're making decisions on how long am I going to work? What's my work history? When am I going to file for benefits, of course? But it's confusing because when you think about how this works, there's basically three important concepts to go into this conversation. There's something called wage indexing, which I'm going to talk about. Of course, we've spent some time on things like delayed credits, and we just talked about how this cost of living works. And there's also something called bin points, that could be a whole episode on its own. But I think it does, again, help understand how all this fits when you're trying to think about your decisions specifically on how long am I going to work? When am I going to retire? When am I going to file? Am I going to delay my benefits? All these different issues that we face when planning for retirement.
Okay.
But the first part of this is there's something called wage indexing. And before retirement, your estimated Social Security benefit adjusts your past earnings using this AWI, this average wage index. And that's basically what helps keep your older earnings, those early years, applicable to your benefit today, right? So if you're earning, just as a basic example, let's say maybe you earned $15,000 in 1988 doing whatever you might have been doing. By applying this average wage index, this AWI, that would be more reflective of, say, $40,000 today,
Oh,
right? So you always hear these terms of saying, okay, adjusted for inflation, this number would have been in 1950 would have been this in 2025. It's a very similar concept. So it's just basically giving an additional weighting to those early years of earnings that you had.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I thought that most of the early earnings were kind of dismissed anyway, if you have a long work history.
It depends. And I think that's where it's important to understand when we're talking about our audience and where we're talking about women planning for retirement. You got to know, do I have 35 years? So we've talked about that a lot as well, but it's your highest 35 years.
Right.
If you don't have 35 years, those numbers matter, right? They make a pretty significant difference. So yes, it's where those early years where, again, you worked in the soda shop or whatever it is that you did, you might not have earned a whole lot, but they still matter. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind. But here's again, back to this controversial aspect of Social Security calculations is for 2026, the AWI increased by 4.84%.
Yeah.
So again, when we're talking about challenges about how Social Security is getting, so that's actually increasing people's benefits and when they're still in their working years. faster than what the actual cost of living increase was.
Okay.
So it's increasing those benefits, compounding the problem.
Right.
So that's where we start looking at when we talk. You hear that while there's going to be more coming in than is going out, or a more going out that's coming in, whatever it is that is going on that's causing this problem, all of this fits into this. And this is where, again, at some point, are they going to have to revamp a lot of this and think differently about how we're doing Social Security? And I think ultimately the answer to that is yes. Now, whether it's the AWI that gets fixed or it's the CPI-W that gets fixed, something has to get fixed, right?
Okay.
But again, I think that's really where understanding how this works, because again, your Social Security is based on your highest 35 years, and that's where this wage indexing helps those early jobs still play an important role. But also, if you have lower earning or part-time years, again, those still matter. So just be aware of that when you're planning. Do I need to continue working? Did I miss time because of being a caregiver? That also can help those years become less damaging if you aren't able to work later on in your retirement years.
Got it.
Now, here's something that I think think a lot of people have been told. So we talked about wage indexing. That only applies up to age 60.
Okay.
That's the first thing. So your earnings are only adjusted for inflation up to age 60. But as most people know, you can't actually file until 62. So we actually have what I would call this gap period where there is actually no cost of living adjustment. There's no wage indexing from 60 to 62. Those earnings years, they still count, but they're not getting increased by any factors. Then at age 62, that's where your cost of living adjustment kicks in, even if you haven't filed. So that 2.8%, if I'm 62 or older, whether I filed or not, that's now what's increasing my benefit.
Okay. Is it just that that's increasing it, or is there something also increasing it?
There's also something that's increasing, but that's more the age factor.
Okay. Gotcha.
So that's when we start saying, okay, at age 62, the Social Security applies, it's increasing my full retirement age benefit, which for most people in those potentially filing years is age 67. So if you're born in 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67.
Mhm.
So even if you have not filed yet, you're getting this 2.8% increase. But if you file early, if you file at 62 instead of age 67, you're getting a 30% decrease in your full retirement age benefit.
Okay.
Because again, we've discussed on several episodes, that is a big factor when you're talking about what my benefit's going to be. The cost of living increase is a separate calculation than my actual benefit itself. So it's increasing my benefit. But the biggest factor in terms of increased benefit is the ability to actually delay when I file.
Okay. So rather than adding to your benefit, really what they're doing is reducing your benefit. So you're continuing to get the inflation bump,
Right.
but you're losing out on I'm getting confused, Eric.
So think about it. So let's use, for example, so the earliest you can file is 62. So if I went ahead and I just filed for benefits, I'm getting, let's call it 30% less than what I would get if I waited until 67.
Right.
But I'm still getting those cost of living increases.
Okay.
So the cost of living increases is not age dependent, other than that's just when they start is age 62. So whether I filed or not, starting at age 62, my benefit is going to increase by that cost of living adjustment, whatever it might be. But by delaying from 62 to 63, I'm getting more simply because I've waited an extra year.
Okay.
And then 64, 65, and so on until 67 being my full retirement age. Then we get into those delayed earnings credits where we say, okay, from 67 to 70, my benefit will increase simply because I've chosen to delay by 8% per year. But what compounds that is saying, okay, if I'm getting an additional 8%, that means I'm also getting an additional cost of living adjustment on that 8% as well. So that number actually can be much bigger. So that's really where this difference in filing age can be so drastic. When you're talking about saying, well, if I'm getting 30% less because I filed at 62, I'm getting 30% less of my cost of living increases as well. So if I'm waiting till a later age to get a bigger benefit, those cost of living adjustments can be even dollar figure wise, they're, percentage wise, they're the same, but dollar figure wise, they get bigger and bigger.
Okay. Yeah. Nobody's ever mentioned this before. This is the first I'm hearing of this.
I'm glad to know that.
Yeah.
Glad I picked this topic.
It's not like I don't know about this stuff.
But again, it all comes into play. And that's why I think it's so important. We're talking about Social Security. Again, it gets a bad rap, and probably deservedly so to a great extent. But we still need to make educated decisions when it comes to understanding how some of these things play into that ultimate, okay, when do I file? If I file early, what does this mean? If I continue working, what does that mean? Being able to understand how all these play together and making a decision, especially if you have lost years in the past for whatever reason, whether it's an illness or again, for many women, it's the caregiving. I took time out of the workforce to raise my children. I took time out of the workforce to take care of my parents. How does that then come into making a better decision going forward as to, do I need to work? Should I work? Should I file early? Should I try to delay? And again, as always, and then we'll hit on this a little bit later, but the conversation around, if I'm married, women need to be part of that conversation about when am I going to file, but more importantly, when is my spouse going to file, especially if they are the higher earner, because that's the one that's going to impact survivor benefits.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's touch on just briefly. I don't touch on the bend points again. Like I said, this could be possibly a whole episode on itself. But these bend points are basically what represents. Almost think of it like kind of like a slice of a pie, right? So the bend points are what results in the percentage of a worker's salary or wages being replaced by Social Security once they actually file. So it's the reason why somebody that makes $300,000 doesn't get this huge Social Security check. So the maximum Social Security check that somebody filing can receive at full retirement age for 2026, 2025, somewhere around $4,000, right? Well, if I made $300,000, that's a relatively low replacement percentage, right? But these bend points basically say, for the first part of my earnings, I'm going to get a bigger replacement factor. But the more I earn, the less and less it's going to replace, which basically says that by the time I'm retired, if I'm a lower income earner and I file for my Social Security, that Social Security should replace a higher percentage of my income.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of saying, again, if you think about like how pensions typically work, so Social Security is, it's hard to compare it to pension again, because most people can't really rely on Social Security as their primary income source. There are obviously a lot of people that have to. But in comparison to like a pension, the more money you made while doing your working years, the bigger your pension's going to get. There's really not a limit, right? With Social Security, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So it's designed to replace a higher percentage of income for lower income earners than it is for higher income earners, right?
Okay.
So that's where these bend points come into play. And again, that's most important when we're talking about these working years, because that's the numbers that are going into that calculation. So I just wanted to touch on this again. Bend points is not something that we want to spend a whole lot of time on, but just understanding that depending on your work history, if you're in years where you're making significantly more or even somewhat more than what you had in your earlier years, that can help out in growing your ultimate benefit.
I want more money.
Yes. We all want more money.
How do I get the most money, Eric?
Work as long as you can. That's it.
Okay.
Don't retire. Now let's talk a little bit about, in terms, again, working on into those later years where we're talking, working in your 50s or 60s or even your 70s, and why it helps. It can be, again, very meaningful in terms of increasing your benefit. Again, especially if you've had, these caregiver gaps, or maybe you had to work part-time, or you just had low earnings years for whatever reason. Again, these earnings years in your 50s and 60s, if they're replacing, use that 35 years. And that's why I always recommend every couple of years. Number one, you want to make sure it's right. But every couple of years, review your work history and see where you're at in this 35-year tracker.
Okay.
Because again, if you've got lower years, it can make a significant difference. And the other part to this, and I know we've hit on this in a couple episodes in the past as well, even if you filed for Social Security, if you continue working, those additional employment years can actually still continue increasing your benefit beyond just the cost of living increases. So I've only got 30 years and I file when I'm 67, I'm still working. If I'm replacing 0 years with positive years, whatever that positive number is, again, that's going to grow your benefit beyond just the cost of living increases or even the delayed credits for waiting until age 70. So just be aware that when you're planning, look at all these different factors to make sure you're making the right decision for you.
I'm glad I have a financial advisor and don't have to worry about any of this stuff.
But and again, it becomes a lot more complex, and unfortunately, there's just situations where it doesn't necessarily. You just don't have the options. You don't have the choices because of health factors and all kinds of different factors that come into play. But I think again, it's important to be aware of how these things work, and again, knowing if I'm still in my working years, how is my benefit increasing? Because you want to check your statement. I mean, that's for retirement planning purposes. What does my statement look like? What is my estimated benefit?
Right.
So if I'm saying, well, if I don't want Social Security to be the primary source of income when I retire, what else do I need to be doing? But what is that number? What is that number going to be? Because again, I've talked about this a lot. For most people, pensions aren't in existence anymore. There's some few people that have them out there, but for many people that are listening to this, it's going to be the single source of lifetime guaranteed income that actually does increase based on cost of living adjustments.
Okay.
So, we've talked about these delayed credits and again, support for survivor benefits. So just to touch on this. So once you are in those retirement years, whether you started benefits or not, that decision to delay as long as reasonably possible, specifically for the higher earning spouse, if you are married, that just makes that much more important to be part of that conversation. Make sure that you're having these decisions, you're coming to these decisions together, because again, the odds are that women are going to outlive the husband. And that's going to be a huge factor in terms of determining what is my benefit going to be. Because if it's a husband and a wife, one of those benefits goes away. So using this information to help you make those ultimate decisions around when should I file, when should my spouse file, and being part of that conversation.
Okay.
So before we wrap up, I just want to talk through just the biggest takeaways I want everybody to get from this episode. Again, the benefit increase for 2026 is 2.8%. Again, your personal inflation, though, could be higher than that. So just be prepared. That's where the planning comes in. Benefits grow differently while you're working than they do after 62. And I think knowing this timeline is going to help you choose when to file and help you with those filing decisions. Every earning year matters. Working later in life can replace low years and permanently increase your benefit. That's why it's so important to assess your filing options and understand whether you want to continue working or need to continue working, and whether that's going to have a significant or a minor impact on your benefit.
Right.
Delaying the higher earners benefit can significantly strengthen the survivor benefit, which again, many women will rely on in those later years. And again, we know Social Security is foundational, but it needs to be part of a broader retirement plan that considers your income, your taxes, your longevity, making sure all those pieces fit together.
Yeah. So basically, what we've been hearing for most of our lives is Social Security is not everything. We're going to need a little bit more.
Exactly. And again, we know there's going to have to be some solution that's going to happen, December 31st of the year before it runs dry. It's going to be at the very last minute.
Really waiting, aren't
Hey,
they?
the day off. Well, and I've talked about this before. The last time we had any big significant changes was 1983, and it's the same exact scenario. We're running short. We got to do something. Okay, well, let's wait till the last minute and
Well, don't worry
we'll come up
about
with
it.
something.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, awesome. Wendy, thank you so much for joining me today. If you want help understanding how these Social Security updates impact your retirement, especially decisions when it comes to when to file, whether to keep working, how survivor benefits work, please visit getmysimplyretirementroadmap.com to schedule a call with our team. That is it for today's episode. For all the links and resources, again, you can visit the simplyretirementpodcast.com. Don't forget to like, follow, and share the show. And until next time, please remember, retirement is not the end of the road. It's the start of a new journey.
That's it for today's episode of the Simply Retirement Podcast. We hope you found our insights and advice helpful in planning for a fulfilling retirement. Don't forget to take action on what you've learned today. Visit our website at blakewealthmanagement.com to learn more about our firm and review our Simply Retirement Roadmap process to get you on the right path to the retirement you deserve. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to helping you achieve your retirement goals. Remember, retirement is not the end of the road, it is the start of a new journey. So embrace it and make the most of it. Until next time, take care. Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security, or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Blake Wealth Management. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Blake Wealth Management or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor, Blake Wealth Management, and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.